All right, so I get a lot of people that reach out to me and they ask me about how to get certain cuts out of a deer, just how to break down a deer in general. So I wanted to formalize a video or a series of videos on how I break down a whitetail deer and how I get certain cuts out of the animal. I just want to preface this by saying I am by no means a professional, and I'm not saying that this is the way to break down a deer. This is just the way that I break down the deer based on the dishes that I like to cook. And that's the nice thing about doing this yourself and getting into custom butchering, is that when my culinary skills evolved, that changed the way that I started breaking down deer and butchering them, because you could really tailor it to how you like to cook. That being said, a lot of people ask me how to get, for instance, a tomahawk steak or something out of a deer, and at that point it's already too late because the deer's been cut up and put in the freezer. So you need to be thinking about these things at this stage right here. So follow along, and you don't need any special tools. All you need is a fillet knife and a Sawzall. So I know there's actual bone saws and stuff out there, but I feel like most people are just like me. They're doing it in their garage and they got a Sawzall and a knife laying around. So follow along. The first cut that we're going to take out is the flank steak. Now the flank steak is a pretty low cut of meat. This is just going to go right into the grind pile 9 times out of 10. So what you're going to do is you're just going to cut this crease and follow along the base of the hind quarter. Come all the way down. Be careful not to hit your tenderloins in there. And just cut straight down, not cutting too far over to hit the tenderloin or the back strap. I'm just going to cut straight down until I hit the first rib. As soon as I hit that first rib, I'm turning my knife 90 degrees and I'm just coasting along that rib bone until I cut it completely free. Now, the next cut of meat that we're going to move to is the shank, which is the lower leg. This has a lot of silver skin, a lot of connective tissue, and for that reason, a lot of people view this as a pretty poor cut of meat. I deem it quite the opposite. Believe it or not, this is my favorite cut off of the deer, because when cooked correctly, you braise it down in a braising liquid for hours, like low and slow. All of that connective tissue turns gelatinous, and it's like a good fat, like a beef fat, unlike all of the the tallow fat that's on the back of the deer that's waxy. So I leave it whole. It's very simple. All I'm going to do, and one thing before I make this cut, I want to point out that I order bone blades for the Sawzall that don't have paint on them, so the paint's not going to flake off and get in your meat, and also the bone blade has a real fine tooth on it, so that, for instance, if you were to use like a wood tooth, you're going to leave some pretty aggressive bone chips in there. So I would order some bone blades. So all I'm going to do for this cut is I'm just going to cut right at the elbow. You could also do this with a knife, but I feel like some people may fumble through that, so I'm just going to do it real quick with the Sawzall. I've already cut off the lower part of the leg. I'm just going to come up to the elbow before it turns into the shoulder, and I'm going to cut it off right here. That's it. What I want to do is I want to attach a couple of recipes to this video showing you how to use the shank, how to cook it. And if you guys give it a shot, I think that you guys will be on the shank train just like I am. The next thing that we're going to do is take the front shoulder off of the deer. Now, there's no ball joint or anything there to pop loose. If you've never done this, all you need to do is just pull the leg out and just cut the connective tissue and the muscle free until it pops loose. Pretty simple. I'll do my best to stay out of the way here. So you're just going to grab the shoulder, and you can see it's pretty self-explanatory once you get in here. Just kind of cut it loose. There's a little bit of cartilage here you gotta cut around. And that's it. Now with this, I'm going to trim this up, but I just package this whole with the shoulder blade right in there, and I'll do blade roast. Maybe I'll just take it out of the fridge, or the freezer rather, and cut jerky strips out of it. Or you could just carve it up and put it in the grind pile, whatever you want to do. But like I said, I trim this up, and we're going to package it whole with the blade in. To trim up these front shoulders here, as I said before, I like to just leave the shoulder blade in there, clean it up, and then put it in the freezer just like that. So really, I just kind of want to, you could feel right here,
like where this muscle just kind of attaches to the side of the shoulder. So I just want to take my knife and just kind of go right around the shoulder blade and cut all these other muscles free. And that's just going to go into the grind pile. So you could feel the shoulder blade here come up and around, and then you just kind of got to grab it and feel for yourself. But come right down here. And then what I'm doing here is I try to find the center of the joint right here so I could cut around it and pop the leg bone free from the shoulder blade. Now I've just got to clean the shoulder blade up. So what I'm going to do is I just try to grab this silver skin here and just shave it off. Okay, that's pretty good there. I'll flip this over. I'll do the same thing on the back. But the idea is I just freeze the shoulder blade like this, and then you could do what's called a blade roast, or what I'll do is as it just barely starts to thaw out, I'll just slice strips like this to make jerky out of, and then cut them free underneath. Or what you could do is you could just bone all this out right now and put it in your grind pile and use it for burger. It really just comes down to preference. Now the next cut that we take out is going to be the tenderloin, and amongst hunters, this is if it's not the favorite cut, it's one of the favorite cuts for sure. So it's very tender, very quality piece of meat. We're going to take our time, make sure that we don't nick it up and waste anything. I kind of just go through and use my finger to kind of get it loose in here, like against the spine. And you know, sometimes you got to use the knife more than others, just depends on the deer. But I just go right along the edge of the spine and start freeing up that muscle. And as I am, see how I'm grabbing with my fingers and pulling? I'm just kind of grabbing, pulling it away from the bone, and I'm freeing it up with my knife. Now this kind of tucks up into the hind quarter a little bit. So as we're going, I'm going to trim some of this fat stuff out of the way so you can see there's some connective tissue that you can kind of stick your finger up inside here and feel how this tucks up into the hind quarter. So I kind of work it up in with my finger and then free it up with the knife. And just keep lifting it up and just making sure you're not leaving any meat behind. So now we're going to trim up our tenderloins. This is really simple. Just take your time because, like I said, this is a pretty quality cut of meat. They're not very big anyways, so just make sure you don't waste anything. But you're just going to trim this kidney fat and stuff that you see stuck to it off of there, and a little bit of silver skin towards the top. So I'm just going to take out the chunk of backstrap that is in between the hind quarter and the first rib. I'm not going to go all the way down because I'm going to leave that attached to the rib bone to make some tomahawk steaks. So what I'm going to do here is I just find this rib, I make a level cut right over until I hit the spine. I'm going to come up to the top, right where it meets, right where the loin meets the hind quarter. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a level cut until I hit the spine. Now when I hit the spine, I'm going to come in right alongside of the spine, and I want to get as tight to that spine as I can with my knife. And I'm going to want to flex it a little bit. I'm putting pressure towards the spine, just like if you've ever filleted a fish or anything like that, getting the skin off. So I want to press the side of my knife up against the spine with a little bit of flex, come right down. And I'm going to go all the way down to the neck because I'm going to have to do that eventually anyways to get these tomahawk steaks out. So now I've got my 3 cuts made on this. So what I'm going to do is you could come in from this side, which I did on this side, just because the way that I'm standing here on the deer, it was easier to just roll it out with my thumb. But, with not being left-handed, now on this side, I might just come over here and just find the bottom of this cut, and you're just going to follow the bones all the way back until you hit the spine, and this drops out. So same thing, I'm just grabbing it with my thumb, I'm pulling it away from the bone, and I'm just letting my fillet knife ride right along the bone here. And that is your backstrap, or as butchers would call it, the loin. This is a high quality cut of meat. A lot of people are going to do steaks. A lot of people like to butterfly them. A lot of different options here. We'll tackle that later. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to trim up our backstrap. It's pretty simple. I'm just going to take all the the fat and the silver skin that's stuck on there and just trim it off real quick. Now I have all of this tallow and silver skin and everything on the back side of this that I need to get off. There's kind of a lip right here. I'm just kind of gonna get it started, try to free it up. And then what I do is I try to get this started. Let me get this out of the way. I try to get this started just, again, like I'm filleting the skin off of a fish. I start under there, I take my knife and I flex it down on, you know, like I'm trying to press it to the workbench. And I like to keep the meat on the edge of the bench so I could kind of go right along the edge. It gets hard to, you know, get your blade all the way down to the table if you're up here like this. So I come over here, I get started, I clamp this down with my fingers, and I just ride right along all of that silver skin and everything and just shave all of that right off the back side of it. Should be able to get about 90% of it, and then you could just go along and trim the few pieces that you missed.
Okay, this is where things get interesting. We're gonna start working on ribs and tomahawk steaks. This is where my method differs from a lot of conventional methods, so this is where I get the most questions. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my Sawzall, I'm gonna go right down the sternum, right down the middle. Until I hit the bottom of the chest cavity. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rib slabs off. But what I want to do is I want to find the base of the back strap, which is about right here. And I want to come down about 4 inches from that because I want to leave about 3 to 4 inches of rib bone attached to the tomahawk steaks. So once I do that, now I'm going to keep peeking inside, you know, because there's a little bit of a curvature to the chest cavity. So I want to keep peeking over and make sure that my blade is staying, you know, I'm keeping the rib bones consistent length. So again, I'm going to come down 3-4 inches. I'm going to go right here. Now here's our rib slab. A lot of hunters believe that venison ribs are no good or there's not enough meat on here to warrant messing with. Completely untrue. I will say though that a whitetail doe like this isn't going to have real meaty ribs. There's not a lot there. It's still worth doing. Now, you know, when you shoot like a bigger mature buck or something, there's quite a bit of meat on there, especially bucks that come out of the Midwest. You get like some 1.5 inch thick ribs off of those. So what we have to do now is we'll address this later, but you'll have to come along the bottom of the ribs here and get this sternum bone off. You could either use a knife or a Sawzall, but like I said, we'll tackle that a little bit later. So now we have our rib rack, and what we have to do is we have to go along and remove the sternum from the ribs. What a lot of people don't realize is there's actually a joint that runs along here, so you could score it and snap it just kind of like drywall. What I'm going to do first though is I'm going to get what's left of this diaphragm out of here and out of my way so I could see. Now, it can be a little bit tricky to find this joint, so you know, if you wanted to use the Sawzall and just cut down along the bottom here, you could certainly do that. You know, I do encourage you to use the knife though and try to get familiar with it, because once you get it, it's really not too bad. That being said, I'll probably fumble through this one, but anyways, I just take the knife and I have to remember, I always have to come down from the sternum more than what I think. That joint is somewhere down along here. Once I've made that score, then I could just snap that joint open just like you would drywall. Once I get that opened up, I'm just going to go along in there with my knife and just cut it free.
Now that that sternum is out of there, I'm gonna turn this over. Now, the way you have to cook venison ribs, you have to braise them for like 4 to 6 hours in a braising liquid, and basically render all this fat out of there. So I'm not gonna go crazy trimming the fat off of here. I mean, the real big obvious stuff right here, I'll definitely trim off a little bit, but there's not a ton of meat on these ribs as it is, so you don't wanna get carried away carving every little piece of fat off of there, because it's gonna render out eventually anyways. So like I said, I'm just gonna get, you know, the biggest chunks off of there. And then what I'm gonna do is just cut it right down the middle for packaging and cooking purposes. And that's it. So now it's time to take the tomahawk steaks, or the standing rib rack, out. If you remember earlier, we made the incision down the spine with our fillet knife all the way down to the ribs. So now what we have to do is we have to take our Sawzall blade and sneak that in there and cut the ribs free from the spine. When you do that, the trickiest part is coming over and then like turning the blade 90 degrees and getting started. Once you get in there, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to, instead of cutting straight down like this, you're going to want to angle your blade a little bit away from the spine, so you're not cutting into the spine and leaving a little bit of that attached. Because what that will do is it'll make it hard to cut the individual tomahawk steaks out in between the ribs, because you'll have like a continuous piece of spine that's attached up here. So again, I'm going to take the blade in here, get started, try to angle it away from the spine a little bit, being careful not to cut into the meat. I'll stop and look periodically to make sure I'm not messing this up. There's no rush. So So here we are. With this, what we could do is we could cut in between the ribs and make our individual tomahawk steaks. We could do just a standing rib roast, or you could do, guys might have seen people do crown roast. That's all it is. So they're all really the same thing, just different aesthetics of serving it, really. Now we're over here at the workbench and we're gonna finish cutting our individual tomahawk steaks. I will say on a buck, these are going to be more sizable. On the doe, they're going to be relatively small, but this will still give you the idea on how to do it. So what I have to do first, I got to trim some of this stuff up. So any of these other muscles that are attached, I'm just going to get rid of them, put them in my grind pile. Flip this thing over. What I do is I pull this tallow down, and there's going to be a layer of meat that's kind of attached to it as well. I'm going to follow that down until I get right to the rib bone. So I want to come right down, cut right down to the rib. And then what I want to do, I'm going to spin this around a couple times as I'm working probably, but what I want to do is turn my knife and just let it coast right down the ribs to pull this outer layer off. This is going to go into the grind pile right there. I'll mess with that later. And now we're going to go back to cutting our tomahawk steaks. So this first one's always going to be a little bit goofy because you started right here, so it's going to be thicker than the others. But what you want to do is if you start on the right side of this rib, for every cut, you want to stay on the right side of the next rib and so on. And I want to follow the same angle that the ribs are at. It's not a perfect 90 degrees like this. They're kind of coming in at an angle. So I'm just going to keep that same angle right through the back strap. So pressing against the rib, And sometimes, you know, there might be a little bit of bone you got to kind of fight through here if you were, you know, if you left a little bit attached with the Sawzall. So anyways, what you do is just come in right here, cut right through it. Same thing on the next one. Find your gap in between, you know, the bone there, cut right down through the steak. So now what we want to do is we want to clean these up. So I'm just going to carve the meat off of this bone here. And you could always get it real nice and pretty right before you cook as well. I like to do as much prep now as I can so I don't have to do a bunch of cleaning when, you know, when it comes time to make dinner down the road. But you're going to have like this layer of silver skin on the outside. What I do is I just get, you know, just like I'm taking the skin off of a fish or something, I come down here, get it started where I could hold it with my fingers. I try to clamp it down with my fingers, turn my knife and press it flat against my workbench, flexing the blade like this as if I was taking the skin off of a fish. And just like that, it's all gone. And now we have a clean tomahawk steak. I usually take about 4 tomahawk steaks off of each rib rack before I kind of move on, because they start to taper down. You can see the backstrap gets smaller as we go. So as it gets smaller, instead of having a bunch of small steaks, I'll take the 4 biggest, I'll set them aside, package them up with maybe the other 4 from the other side. And then what I do is I just leave this hole for like a standing rib rack or standing rib roast. Now I need to trim this up. I'm going to trim it up the same way that I did for the first 4. Just come down, take this outer layer of meat and you know, tallow off of the ribs. Trim that up in the grind pile later. You want to be careful not to go in here too deep with the knife and start to cut this free from the ribs as you clean these. But right there at that line, what you want to do is you want to start cutting the meat out from in between each rib. So I usually just kind of stand it upright like this. I cut down the rib bone, cut that free. All that stuff goes into the grind pile. And then, you know, so I cut down both sides of the rib, and then I get to the bottom where it meets the back strap, and I turn 90 degrees and just cut that free. Once you get down to the end, there's not much keeping this attached to what's left of the small end of the back strap here. So I usually just cut these last couple ribs right off. And then I'll just square the end of this up anyways. This goes into the grind pile. And then you do have a little bit of silver skin I like to trim off here. It could kind of be a little bit of a pain. Hopefully your knife is good and sharp. Just, you know, go along the start of it. Trying to not take, you know, especially on a doe or something where there's not a ton of meat here anyways, try to be careful that you're not taking any meat along with the silver skin. I just keep tension on it. I keep pulling it tight with my left hand and then cutting the silver skin free with my fillet knife. There you go. Now when I go to cook, like I said, I might clean these bones up a little bit better, get them all nice and white. But you just throw that right on the grill, cast iron skillet, however you want to cook it. Here's your standing rib roast. All right, so the last thing that we have to do is we have to carve the neck meat off of the spine here before we take the Sawzall and cut the spine free from the hind quarters. Don't be afraid to mess this up. For me, it just goes in the grind pile. A lot of people like making neck roast out of it, which is fine. I get plenty of roast, and I always need more meat for the grind pile. So that's where mine goes. So I just kind of continue this cut right down from the back strap, and then I just roll my knife kind of around the spine and just get the meat off all the way around. Nothing too complicated here. Cut it free from the esophagus there. I come around the front, make sure that I didn't leave anything on the brisket or anything. I'm just gonna get this esophagus completely out of the way. But I would say that we picked this one pretty clean. So now all we're gonna do is we're gonna take our Sawzall and just cut it free from the hindquarters. Not too much waste there. I'm just finishing up my grind pile here, and this is where, like the flank steaks, the trimmings from all the other cuts, the neck meat, all wound up in the grind pile. This is really self-explanatory. You're just trimming the bulk of the fat and connective tissue off. But since it's going to be ground and, mixed with fat and other things, it's just not as critical to get it as clean as some of these other cuts. So I'm just getting the bulk of everything off, chunking it up, and then throwing it over into the grind pile. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to separate these hindquarters. Then I'm going to cut the legs off of them, and I just let them hang for a little bit, and they're usually the last thing I cut up as I make more space on my workbench. So what we'll do is later on we'll do a video on breaking down all the different muscles in the hindquarter. But for right now, I'm just going to take my Sawzall, cut right down the middle. Then I'll just cut these legs off up here. Being careful not to cut below where this tendon attaches, or else your meat will fall off the gambrel. So the last video that we're going to do is how to break down the hindquarter and separate the different muscle groups out of it. The muscle groups that I'm going to focus on getting out of here are going to be the 3 round muscles: the top round, the bottom round, and the eye of round. I'm also going to focus on the sirloin. There's going to be some smaller muscles on there that I just take out, I debone and put in the grind pile. Like I said, I kind of always need more ground meat. And then last but not least, once all that's done, we're going to take the shank off of it. So it's really simple to separate these out once you just kind of get in there and start digging around with your finger in between the muscles. You follow these seams right here like this, and you cut that, and then you get in between there with your thumb and feel in between the 2 muscles, and then you just kind of get in between there with your knife and just cut it free. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim some of this tallow fat out of my way so that I can see where these seams are on the muscles. once you get it started, you can get in there with your thumb and kind of pull a lot of it back and then just cut it free. Okay, so now we're ready to start. I usually start right here with this seam. There's like a wedge of fat in there. I just kind of come in here with my knife and just kind of cut that out of there. And then that allows you to feel the seam right here in between these two muscles. This is the sirloin, and then this is going to be your bottom round. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in there with my thumb and be pretty aggressive about this. Try to, pull apart as much as you can, and then where it comes to an end and just turns into connective tissue, just cut that free with your knife. Now up here at the top side, you're going to feel that it's going to attach to the bone back here. So all I'm going to do is just come across the top and just cut that free. And then again, I'm pulling up, I'm seeing the connective tissue that's still hanging on, and I'm cutting that free with the knife. Down here at the bottom, this muscle just tapers out. And you can see I've really got nothing in between here. I'm pinching my fingers together, so I'm going to cut that right there. And now over here, it's not as obvious as a seam, but this is the dividing line between this round and the eye of round. So what I'm going to do is right where I could see that just starting, I'm just going to very carefully cut that free with the knife. There we are. There's the bottom round. Now that eye of round that I was talking about is a small tubular shaped muscle that's nestled in between the top and bottom round. So that's right here. Again, this gets really thin down there. I'm just going to cut that. And again, just kind of chase this connective tissue down here. So I've reached all the way around there. There's just a little bit of muscle up here at the top side holding it together. So I'm just going to cut that free. Follow that seam right there. And this tapers down here at the end. You can see it's really just kind of connective tissue there, so I'm just going to cut that free. Got to trim this up obviously, but there's my eye of round. Now the next thing I have to do is I have to take this top round out of here. So again, I'm going to reach for the seam. I'm going to get in between there, cut this junk free. And this connects to this bone up here. So what I'm going to do is find where the edge of that is and just cut that free from that bone. You can see it a little bit better on this side. That bone runs right there. Over here, it just kind of connects to where the femur is on the back side of the sirloin, and I'm just going to cut that free in there. Actually, sorry, the seam is right here. And there's your top round. Now, we've also got this other muscle here that was attached to the side of that last roast. I'm just going to put this in my grind pile. Like I said, I always need more stuff in the grind pile. Now, the next muscle I'm going to take off of the hind quarter here is going to be the sirloin. And the sirloin is this football looking shaped muscle right here, and it's wrapped right around the femur. You can see it connects down here at like the kneecap. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start down there, and I'm just following along this leg bone, because like I said, it just really kind of wraps around the bone and attaches there. So I'm just going to follow the bone around and cut that off of there. And up here, you'll find yourself hitting like the ball joint area up here, and you just kind of got to cut it free across the top. Find that leg bone again, peel it back. So now this sirloin here, I want to get the main part of the sirloin out of there. There's a lot of secondary muscles that are attached to the outside. So I'm just going to grab a hold of this stuff and just pull it, try to separate it the best I can. Use my knife where I have to. There's our sirloin. We still got to trim some silver skin off. Now all I'm going to do up here, and this is perfectly good muscle here. I mean, this is nice and lean. You know, if you need more stuff for your steaks, that's fine. You could save this for that as well. I just debone it and put it in the grind pile. So I'm just peeling it back, and you know, this is the pelvis bone up here, and I'm just trying to clean all this muscle off there the best I can. Okay, so last but not least, now we got to get our shank off of there. There's two ways you could do it. You could use the Sawzall and cut right here and right down here, just like we did on the front legs. Or what you could do is try to find the middle of this joint and try to cut through the joint. It could be a little tricky. Sometimes I find myself getting right through it, and other times I find myself fumbling a little bit. Okay, a little bit of a fight, but we got through it. Now I'm just going to take the Sawzall. First I'm going to cut this tendon right about there. And then I'm going to take the Sawzall, cut off right about there. Now we have our shank. So just to recap, you know, we went over the shank in great detail earlier, so we all know what that's about. Now we have a sirloin, which the sirloin is a good cut of meat, but it's not the best. There's still a lot of connective tissue that runs through the middle of it up there. You know, I'll do a lot of different things with this. Sometimes I'll make jerky, sometimes I'll cube it up and do stir fry. I have put it right on the Traeger before and smoked it. It's fine, but the cleanest cuts of meat out of this hind quarter are going to be the 3 round muscles. So you're going to have your bottom round, which is right there. You're going to have your eye of round, and then you're going to have your top round. There's not one piece of connective tissue in these. Once you trim the silver skin and everything off the outside, it's as lean as it gets. So I'll use these muscles right here to do a lot of my stuffed roasts, like the recipe we did with the goat cheese and spinach. And like I said, I'm gonna finish trimming off all the little scraps of meat off of the femur bones and put that in the grind pile, and then we're done.